I'm sitting on my couch. I'm recovering from a cold, so my voice is not the best. I'm here with my good friend Lloyd. Lloyd, welcome to the live stream.
Thank you very much, Mel. Good to be here.
It's great to see so many of you here. Hello to Marco Paolo, who's giving up the post-coronation viewing this evening for this. So hello to all the English viewers. If you are watching this, shame on you. You should be watching all of the King Charles stuff. But no, welcome everyone. And so who else we have? He Never Return as a Horse is here. Vilnius. Bob Fisher is here. And who else? The Duza Dude. Carol B. Nonius. And who else? We'll just say. I think that's it. I think we've covered everyone. So welcome everyone. This is going to be more like a show today because we're going to be reacting to some videos. Some of them are serious videos, some are funny. And then we're going to be talking about the Ottomans in the last part of the show today. And hello to Paul Ellis as well. I just noticed you. Hello to Dragon.
Welcome, Paul.
Yeah. So going to be sharing some videos. I don't know how it works with the videos. Can we talk over them, or are we silent when we play a YouTube
You may need
video?
to pause them.
Yeah. Okay. And then it cuts in then with us. But okay, so this first one is a video with Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds talking to Dr. Sean Anthony, and he's talking about the value of the Hadiths and Sirah and so on. As you probably know, that neither of us put much value in the Hadiths. They're all part of the standard Islamic narrative, which is why we're trying to dig to find something solid underneath. But it's interesting to see an academic argue that there's some value in these Hadiths. So let's, without further ado, let's have a look, and we'll come back and react to them. And here we go.
The Prophet Muhammad's life was in its basic outline.
Well,
I think we have.
Let me start to roll.
Join large-scale battles with military vehicles. The online action game War Thunder has received a major update.
As a serious response to the claim, which maybe I've made in certain ways, that the Islamic sources are difficult, if not impossible, to use to get at what really happened. I mean, your sort of conversation partner there is Patricia Crone, who said you can accept them, something like you can accept them and reject them, but you can't work with them. Is that right? It was a quotation, something like that?
That's pretty close. That's close enough, if that's
okay.
right.
All right, something like that. Yeah. So, I mean, is that a good way of conceptualizing this project? Is that what you're up to here, to show that, yes, you can work with them?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is, I think that the sources that are available to us have changed significantly. And I think there's a lot of shorthand that folks have been lazily relying upon, and maybe it's just a byproduct of some of the outdated materials that we teach with and stuff like that, which you always learn when you're going from, like, when you're kind of going to the newer scholarship to kind of the older ways of just conceptualizing and building a course or building a system and things like that. So I want to intervene on a number of levels. So I'll might as well just tell you one of my the things that annoy the crap out of me the most. So when people say something like, our earliest biography of the Prophet Muhammad is by Ibn Hisham, is real by Ibn Ishaq, but we only know Ibn Ishaq through Ibn Hisham, and who knows all the things that he changed or left out. And it's so totally wrong. I think that's, like, to me, like, the number of sources that we have that are that represent the early Arabic tradition, the early Arabic historiographical tradition that emerged in the 2nd century, which is shared by the Umayyads and the Abbasids equally, is very large and very robust. And I think it's totally underappreciated. And so part of me, I wanted to push back and say, we have a impressive number of sources. I mean, you could just like name them. It's not just like Ibn Ishaq, but like my other guy, Muhammad ibn Rashid. We're going to soon have Musa ibn Uqba, whose manuscript was just discovered and is going to be published. We have people like Ibn Jurayj in his tafsir. We have Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. We have Abdullah ibn Mubarak. We have Malik ibn Anas. And like, that's just some of them. You know, we can kind of expand upon the stuff with even non-Sunni material. Like one of the materials that Patricia herself worked on that I think is still overly neglected is the Risala of Salah ibn Dhakwan, which is an Ibadi text, so it's a non-Sunni text, and it contains a lot of very interesting historical narrative in it. And this, to her, is more or less written sometime around the turn of the 7th and 8th century, so around 700 or so. And there we already have the general outline of early Islamic history. We have the idea of Ottoman codifying the Quran to give it a more Quranic example. Quotations directly from the Quran throughout the entirety of the text is more or less the same thing. I mean, these sources I think need to be given their day, but at the same time, I don't want to say that there's so much that we know 100% for certain. And the main metaphor that I like to use is the idea of like of high resolution versus low resolution. I think that we have a pretty robust low resolution image of what the Prophet Muhammad's life was in its basic outline. I think we have a really great idea of what his preaching was about. I think that's recorded in the Quran. I think that's our saying source. That's our cue. And I think that the general outline of his life goes around this hinge of the Hijrah. I think you can deduce that from the Quran. I think you also have robust reason to believe that the general outline in the Syrian literature is correct as well. And I think we can do stuff like that.
Okay. Were you able to hear that, all of that?
Yeah, I was able to. Yep.
So, your thoughts?
He says there's a fairly large understanding of Muhammad's. Well, a lot of the corpus was already established, and that is probably true. But if I look at the Sharia, that was only sort of completed somewhere around the 16th century. So that took about 900 years. And we also know that certain narratives developed very late. Like, for instance, you look at the narrative of the Burak.
Yeah.
That only developed really about 100 years after Muhammad's death. And that the earliest source is in poetry. Now, the last I checked, poetry is not termed science. It's called fiction.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, he's saying, sure, you've got some earlier sources, but the corpus was altered and it got added to over time, as we know, even from the Kathisma, that some of these stories got added to only after they got to Jerusalem and they started to add certain things.
Yeah.
So he's maybe not being entirely accurate. And then Paul Ellis asked a very important question. I don't know if that's relevant there.
Yeah. Let me just put that up. This one here. Is that the same GSR SWA interview which SWA accepts that he only asks questions that his readers, mostly Muslims, want him to ask? I haven't seen the whole video. I'm giving first reaction to it. I've actually purposely not pre-watched the video, so I'm giving my reaction, but I think it is part of a much longer, wider video.
Also,
but
go on, sir.
Yeah, my reaction to the video myself is he's kind of making the argument, if you have more quantity of something, then that necessarily equates to quality, that you can, it's kind of like if you ask 10 liars something, okay, you say, well, that's not very reliable. But if you ask 100 liars and they tell you more or less the same thing, well, then it's more reliable because there's more people telling you it.
No, there's something he's missing. They mentioned Patricia Crone. And
Yeah.
Patricia Crone very distinctly, very clearly stated the earliest sources have less information. They are very sparse and they lack details. There is no way to logically connect A to B in the earliest sources. But she says, as time goes on, in the later sources, somehow sources based upon earlier sources that lack details suddenly have rich, detailed narratives.
Yeah.
She says, this is not possible. You can lose detail over time, but for you to add detail means you've been embellishing and creating fiction. So he doesn't say that about Patricia Crone. He missed that. And that's I'd say that she's more right than he is in this point.
Yeah, and I think Shoemaker's argument in his recent book that if all of these stories are based on oral tradition, he's basically arguing that human memory is very unreliable, and people only at the very best can remember a vague gist of things. And if you're talking about an illiterate society, it's even worse than with a literate society. And I think about a third of his book is a series of arguments why you cannot rely on the Hadiths and Sirah, because of the propensity of human beings, when tested under scientific situations, are not able to recall things accurately.
Also, if we think about this, there are volumes of hadith that are considered authoritative for Muslims that we don't even know of, like in Urdu, like the Kanz al-Amal, for instance. Very few know about that, and there's so many other volumes. But roughly 99% of all the hadiths, and there are millions, there's at least 2 million that I've counted, I think, that have been discarded. And we've got like 20,000 out of 2 million that are considered reliable. So he says, well, the hadiths are reliable. But the moment we use the hadiths, Muslims will tell us, no, that's da'if, even when it's got the word Sahih stamped in big red letters on it.
Yeah.
So now, are the hadiths reliable? Because which hadiths is he referring to?
Yeah.
Because apparently, according to Muslims, the vast majority, well over 99% of them, are unreliable, and only a small portion of that 1% are Sahih. They still use da'if. They still use the weaker ones, right? So how reliable are they really?
Yeah, and it's a bit rich for him to say he gets annoyed with people to point out that Ibn Hisham's book, depending on Ibn Ishaq's, is 200 years past the time. He kind of, he said, oh, but there's all of these earlier stuff, that's there, and we're uncovering these documents and so forth. But that, it's you're dealing with a shaky foundation all the way through, and to the quantity of it makes little difference.
Yeah. And then few are aware also that within the Islamic sources, you discover that the early Muslim sources were called the Israeliyat, which were the stories of the Israelis, which would basically be the Mishnah, effectively. The Talmud.
Yeah.
Let's just use that. So they were taking Jewish stories, the Israeliyat, and then when they realized that they were starting to endorse these Jewish things, and they were tied to the Jews through this, they had to dump those, and they had to then go, and 200 years later, suddenly these new hadiths arrive, and they dumped the Israeliyat in shame. They were relying on Jewish texts, and then they went and wrote their own. Yeah. So, I think there's details there that he's missing. And look, I mean, you've coined the term standard Islamic narrative. Last week, I started using the term the standard academic narrative.
Yeah.
And I think it's just as sketchy as the standard Islamic narrative.
Yeah, and I think, thinking of that phrase, I saw you mentioned that. I thought this video was perfect tie-in with that. It's just a shame. He's one of the few scholars in this whole field that I don't have a lot of time for. I can barely watch videos with Dr. Sean Anthony because of this. I don't know. There's a spectrum from credulity on one side and skepticism on the other side, and he's just way too far towards the end of credulity.
Yeah, he's like Jonathan Brown. What Jonathan Brown? I scratched my head listening to that guy. I'm like, sure, buddy. Sure.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know how an academic who's that credulous can actually get a paycheck. Because I would have thought one of the first things to be an academic is you have to pass exams showing that you're able to critique things and not just say, oh, well, there's so much of this material, oh, it must be true. You know?
Yeah. Also, two things. The standard academic discourse, very interesting. Paul Ellis made a very important comment, which I'd also like to comment on after you read it. And two, also in your Skype, I've sent you a link to that 60-second video by Shabir Ali, if you could play that as well later.
I don't have it to hand. Do you have it to hand by any chance?
Can I email it to you?
We just say, yeah, please. Yeah, I can.
No, so you're on Skype. So let me just email that link to you.
Yeah.
And hopefully you can play it later. But just read that comment from Paul Ellis. I think that's a very powerful, potent statement there.
Yeah, let me just check my email 1 second. Let's find. Sorry, Paul. Let me see. Is that it? Oh, there it is. Yeah. If, as we agree, the core narrative is not misremembered memories, but state propaganda lie, then the traditional skill of standard historical analysis becomes much less valuable than GSR SWA claim. Okay, so
Agreed. So,
yeah,
look, I'll go. Maybe I'll start on this. So, the core
yeah,
narrative is not misremembered, but a state-propagated lie. So, in the 9th century, early 9th century, in the early 800s, the Muslims established, one of the caliphs established a, let's just say, a department of the government that was responsible for dealing with arguments against Islam. They established a state propaganda function.
yeah,
And their job, they were called the controversialists, adab al-jadal. Their job was to write polemics and write apologetics to deal with any arguments against Islam, to counter them outright, to study them and put out state propaganda. And don't forget, dawah correctly translates as state propaganda. Dawah is state propaganda. So yes, this is a function. And I don't know why academics don't talk about this, because it's within the Encyclopedia of Islam. It discusses this as something that the Muslims did. They put out propaganda. So yes, it was a state propagated lie.
yeah. I don't, if I understand the point correctly, then the traditional skill of standard historical analysis is much less valuable. I think even when you're dealing with state propaganda, using the skills of historical critique, you can still find the holes, even if it's propaganda, because propaganda is essentially a string of lies. And one way of determining that something is lies, you can find out that actually it's based on historical lies or non-truths. So while I get your point, Paul, I think there is a little bit of scope for the critique to actually get behind that propaganda as well, I think. Now, do you want if I play the what's his name, the video that you shared with me? Should we go into that next?
Yeah, sure. If you'd like to, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Horse is a ministry of disinformation. And yes, that is true. Hi, Peridot. Welcome. Thank you for showing up. Nicodemus. Hello. Deduza, Horse, and Villainous. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so this is actually a very interesting one, Lloyd, that you shared with me, because we've spoken about.
You can turn off the subtitles, because I have subtitles already.
Okay, great. Okay, here we go.
From the Islamic point of view, this is not problematic at all, because let's say Zoroastrians were praying 5 times a day. Let's say Zoroaster himself was a prophet of God. Well, none of that is strange to Muslim thinking, because we understand that Islam is a religion that God has revealed to prior prophets before our Prophet Muhammad. And some of the things that we are given as prescriptions now in our faith, like fasting, is clearly said to be following the example of people before us. As God has prescribed for those before us, he's prescribing the fasting for us as well.
And we also don't know how many prophets in total God has sent, right? We only know of the ones that we know of
in the Quran. And Zoroaster is not mentioned in the Quran, but he could very well have been a prophet of God. In fact, when one looks at his teachings, one finds it difficult to think, how could he not have been a prophet of God?
The interesting thing there, Lloyd, is that he doesn't even countenance the idea that Zoroastrianism and Islam might contradict each other.
I know. It's crazy. And that
yeah,
Ahura Mazda and paganism and fire rituals, and that is insane that he takes us on board. I mean, what would induce him to do this? I mean, that's just, I don't understand it.
I think it might be a sign that he doesn't really know that much about Zoroastrianism, and he's responding to a common accusation.
The 5 prayers were taken from Zoroastrianism, which they very well seem to be, as well as the night journey, the Miraj, was taken directly from Zoroastrianism as well.
Yeah.
So he's trying to say, well,
he has to own it. He has to say, well, they're really just part of us. They're an earlier version of Islam, essentially. Yeah, I'll just play it to the end and see. There's only a few more seconds to just say.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr.
You're welcome. From the Islamic point of view,
just come back to you now. Yeah, fascinating. So it's quite an admission.
Yeah, but you've been talking about the links between Islam and Zoroastrianism, and I've been finding corroboration of that. And there's a lot more than that, So things are starting to look very, very weird.
Yeah,
Islam, I mean, it's a soup. It took from everything.
Yeah, I think if it becomes fully established that the Zamzam is named after a Zoroastrian god, which I will call a demon, because for me, any god other than God is a demon. But If that is actually the case, then this is very, very troublesome for Islam, and it's only going to get worse as we start putting all these different pieces together. Now, there's
and don't forget, I mentioned to you there was the Dabistan, a comparative religious text written in 1645, which we mentioned, very late, but it says that the temple that they had among the images of the Kaaba was one of the moon, exceedingly beautiful, where the temple was called the Mahga, or the moon's place, which the Arabs changed into Makkah.
Yeah.
It's a late source, but it's a Zoroastrian book of history of Islam.
Yeah, I suppose the key thing is maybe it's linking back to much earlier. But there does seem to be, even in the Islamic tradition, like if you take Al-Tabari, there does seem to be, if you read between the lines, a sense that Zoroastrianism is having an influence because, for example, he refers to 3 or 4 different variations of Zamzam as an alternative word for Zoroastrianism. And so the fact that the Zamzam well is named that is kind of very telling.
Yeah.
And go ahead, sir.
Dusan makes a good point. He says the early Islamic coins had Zoroastrian symbols on them.
Yeah, which would indicate a level of being comfortable with that in the early days. I think one of the things is that Zoroastrian, or sorry, I was going to say, any form of heresy doesn't have any clear boundaries in terms of where, the extent of what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable in the belief system until it's firmly in place. It takes centuries before it's firmly in place. So you can imagine over the first couple of 100 years, it was very fluid in terms of what was in, what was out.
It's still fluid. It's still responding to polemics. It's still developing in response to polemics. It changes.
Yeah.
It's making different claims now. I mean, it's making different. Think about the claims Muslims used to make 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They make different arguments now.
Okay, we got a message here from Ting Tong. It's not simply ignorance, but it's the Islamic propaganda to claim Islam is the original religion of mankind and all the other older faiths is a corruption of the deen. Yeah. Now, I want to share this next video with you, which kind of gives a sense in which there's an awful lot of ignorance among Muslims, but this is on the epic scale. Now, if someone asked me, I don't know, could you describe what the Vatican looks like, or could you describe what maybe some I don't know, a place in Jerusalem looks like, I'd probably be able to manage it. I think most Christians might be able to manage that. But it'd be shocking if a Muslim doesn't know what the Kaaba looks like. But this video that I'm going to show you would suggest that he doesn't. So let me just share this with you and we'll talk about it afterwards. Let me see. Okay, here we go.
We have a guest, Islam.
Hello, hi, everyone. Kwan,
Hello.
Kwan, you Muslim?
Alhamdulillah.
Why you debate with them? Look what he put the Kaaba, man.
I know that. No, that's the actual judgment. But
Offensive of Muslim.
What?
It's the Kaaba,
These
bro.
people, he just.
So what he's saying this image of the Kaaba is offensive to Muslims. Can you guess why? Maybe you can't hear me, can you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, because I mean, this is the one that looks like a toilet.
That's right, yeah. So
He just want to make Islam bad. Don't debate with them.
Hold on. What's wrong with the picture?
Where are you from, brother?
Hold on, Kwan. What's wrong with the picture?
Look the picture in Kaaba. You should not debate with them.
What's wrong with the picture? Tell me.
I don't need to tell you. You see, you can see what you put
This
there.
is the original picture for the Kaaba. What's wrong with you?
Why you want the Muslim to make bad?
This is original picture from the Kaaba. What do you mean bad?
No.
What do you mean no? You are an
That's
idiot.
where the Imam stands.
Yeah, he thinks it's a toilet. He thinks like a toilet. He thinks it's a toilet.
Yeah, look, he looks like
This is
toilet.
Kaaba, dude. This is Kaaba. Go.
No, don't lie, man. If I put your cross toilet, what you think?
Wait.
This is
No.
It is not fair to do for Islam like that.
Islami, you're
Hold on, all
wrong.
of you, 1 second,
Islami,
guys.
I
Come on,
believe
come on.
the same. I believe the same.
Joseph.
Looks like.
Yeah, but you should not debate with them. You give him argument to them to hate Allah, to shout Allah, to shout Prophet. Don't debate with them. Just them make them block. That's it. Don't report them.
One second, bro. One second. When you are a Muslim, can you talk to him? Tell him this is the Kaaba. How it look like?
You don't need you to debate for Muslim because you don't know. You don't have knowledge for my religion. Nothing.
It's not toilet. It looks like, but it's not. It's the Kaaba. That's the actual picture. It looks like a toilet, but it's not.
This is a from Mecca.
It is a toilet, but that's the original picture, though.
Many people get confused.
It's not the original picture. If I put the picture cross and I do this, what do you think you are from Christendom?
So, quite hilarious.
I sent you 2 pictures of the Kaaba as well, but I've just sent you 2 pictures by email of the Kaaba. If you could maybe put those up when you have the moment.
Okay, let me see that. Yes, it's quite hilarious the level of ignorance. Let me just see.
That was hysterical.
Okay.
I mean, we're never going to mistake, the like you take the Church of St. Paul in Rome. We're never going to mistake that for a toilet. I don't think any pictures of that.
No. Okay, it's.
I've sent you 2 photos. Yeah, the Kaaba.
Got to
to show the.
Yeah, now just getting it down. Okay, so here's start with the first one. Okay, all right. Talk us through
this is the beauty of the Kaaba, the impressive, amazing, oldest religious building in the world, the finest, greatest shrine of Allah. Isn't that it's
incredible. Even how did they manage to get so many different colored blocks from different time periods and so on?
Yeah, and you can see the 3 cranes in the background as well. Mentioned in the Quran.
Oh man!
I mean, this is what they go on about. This building, this ugly cinder block building.
Yeah, it's amazing when the cloth is peeled back off it. It just shows it really exposes the reality of what they're doing. But here, I'm going to show you the second image here. Can you see that one? Is that...
Not yet.
Oh, maybe I need to stop sharing the first one. Let me just do that first, and then I'll learn in as I go here.
This is proof that this is not idol worship. As soon as you bring that up, there we go.
No, it doesn't look a bit like idol worship to me.
Yeah, you got to lick it before you. Yeah, what's that guy doing?
Yeah, that down bottom right doesn't look very much like the one at the top right. It looks very different.
Maybe they've exposed. Who knows what? I know. Who knows what's going on? But this
doesn't take a lot of imagination to kind of think about what that looks like. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, and this guy licking. What is he licking? I mean, think about it. He's licking it. Like, how does a stone remove sins? Only Allah can remove sins. So Allah must be a stone.
Yeah.
Allah doesn't come to earth, but Allah is a stone on earth.
Yeah.
Islam is not paganism. It's not idol worship, but this is a stone that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty gross. And just the thoughts of millions of people kissing and licking the same thing doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Actually, just while we're on that whole sort of area, let's just have a look at how Allah blesses Mecca. Now there's loads of videos I could show. This is from last winter. Let me see if we get it here. Here we go. So Allah.
temperatures began to drop in the most part of the Saudi Arabia started Sunday and will continue to fall steadily until Wednesday, so the National Meteorological Center said. The fall of mercury occurred in the northern, eastern and central region of Kingdom. Area Governorate in the northern border region recorded the lowest temperature in the Kingdom, reaching 3 degrees Celsius, as well as in Riyadh, the coldest city in Saudi Arabia, has recorded the lower temperature were recorded at minus 12 degrees Celsius in the past. Snow continued to fall in many higher in the city, which witnessed.
So there we go. Allah clearly pleased with Mecca, just showering his blessings on it. And there's tons of videos of the flooding over just the last 5 years. Absolutely horrendous conditions.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't enhance any video. What's that about? I don't know. I like this comment here. Definitely the wrong week to make the Hajj. Absolutely. Right. Okay, let's have a look. Now, there's another video I want to share with you and get your reaction, and then we'll move on to the topic of the Ottomans. And this is to do with the rate of conversions to Christianity from Islam, particularly over the last few years. So a nice feel-good video after some of the negative things. Okay, so let me just try this one.
I want to talk about a remarkable phenomenon that is going on in Asia and Africa, namely the large-scale conversion of Muslims to Christianity. Historically, this is completely unprecedented. Historically, it's very difficult, and very few people have converted out of Islam. There are a couple of exceptions to that rule, but in general, well, we know that Islam doesn't like people to convert out. In fact, if you think of the old line about the Hotel California, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. That applies to Islam. You can't leave. And you can't leave to become an atheist, and you can't leave to become a member of another religion. In both cases, it's considered not just losing your faith, but apostasy, betraying the Muslim people. And it's been punishable by imprisonment or beatings, or in some cases, even death. Remember, for example, the fatwa that was put on Salman Rushdie, the writer, because he was seen as a sort of apostate to Islam. So this strategy of making it difficult, if not impossible, to convert out has historically stopped Muslims from doing it. And there, as I say, are a few exceptions to this rule. In 16th century Spain, once Catholic monarchs got a hold of Spain, they established preferential treatment for Catholics, and they essentially expelled the Moors, the Muslims, from Spain. Now, there were some Muslims at that time who converted to Christianity in order to be able to stay in Spain, but that's an historical exception. Even as late as the 1980s, a missionary wrote a book called 10 Muslims Meet Christ. And while the book focused on 10 Muslim converts, it was very clear from the book itself that this is extremely rare. It's really hard to get a Muslim convert. So like, I found 10. Let me tell you about their stories. But now, interestingly, in many countries, not just in one particular place, in Algeria, in Albania, in Syria, in Kurdistan, in Egypt, you have Muslims converting to Christianity. In fact, they're converting to Christianity in such numbers that there's even a name for them. They're called MBBs, Pastors call them MBBs, meaning Muslim background believers. Believers, Christian believers who come from a Muslim background.
Just before we continue with the video, Lloyd, can you just tell us a little bit about what are the consequences in relation to Sharia for those who leave Islam?
The Sharia is very clear across all 4 schools of jurisprudence that if someone apostatizes and that person is not insane or underage, then that person is given an opportunity to repent and return to Islam. If they do not, they may be killed, because this is a crime. Because when you say the Shana Na, it is a contract with Allah. So you are literally making a contract with Allah, and effectively speaking, you are selling your soul. You have sold your soul to Allah. And we know within the Western Christian context, selling your soul is to make a pact with the devil.
Yeah.
So now they say, for instance, that you have 3 days, and then actually there is no time limit. It is you may kill them on the spot. You may wait 2 or 3 days. There's flexibility, but those are the consequences.
Yeah. So the fact that there are so many converting to Christianity against all those odds would suggest that there's, even the dangers of it is not sufficient to hold them within the religion. And if those negative consequences were not there, probably an awful lot more would leave Islam to join Christianity. I would have thought.
It's not just there's also legal consequences. There's also family consequences. You can be, your family can disown you, lose your job, and also don't forget in the Arabic countries, it is a legal status on your ID card. They put there Christian or Muslim.
Yeah.
And if you don't fall in that category, the law applies to you differently. So this would effectively make them an apartheid type state.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear a little bit more.
How many converts? No one knows exactly for sure. But from the Muslim side, you have had complaints. There was a complaint by a guy on Al Jazeera who said that by his count, 6 million Muslims are converting to Christianity each year. Think about that. That's a huge number. Traditionally, Muslims have gained forces by conquering. So they don't really...
I'll just wait for this ad to go. 1 second.
Convert people to Islam really by persuasion either. They use force. But as I say, very few people convert out. But now that's happening. Now, one of the most... why is it happening? Well, one reason it's happening is that people are rebelling, Muslims are rebelling against radical Islam. One pastor in Egypt apparently said that the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi was, quote, the great evangelist. Why? Because the extremism of his policies told a lot of Muslims, wow, this guy's crazy. I don't want to be part of any religion.
You want to play this at 1.5 times speed?
Part of the reason.
What was that?
You want to play this at 1.5 times speed?
Yep, let's do that. So the ISIS and so forth really has woken up an awful lot of Muslims more than anything else to the reality of the religion that they belong to, and it's kind of spurred them on to get out of there.
I think the internet's also hitting them very hard because we are now their sources. We now have access to all their sources. They put them on the internet, and that was an issue for them.
Yeah.
For the conversion, but the fact that it's happening in so many different places shows that that's not the only reason. Now, interestingly, when you talk to Christian pastors, and I'm referring here to a very interesting article that quotes a number of these pastors, they claim that the reason that Muslims convert, or at least a substantial number of them convert, is that they have dreams and visions of Jesus Christ. Now, this is a little bit far out, but apparently an Iranian convert, this guy's fairly typical, he said, quote, many people are having dreams and visions about a shining man dressed in white telling them about Jesus. The leader of a Presbyterian church in Pakistan said that there were some Afghan imams who traveled hundreds of miles to study the Bible. And when he was asked, well, why are they doing that? He goes, quote, dreams, Christ appeared to them in their sleep. And then a Colorado pastor who conducts classes in Arabic via the radio and the internet, he goes, virtually all my students came following dreams.
Wow.
There's a missionary named Michael Stallwork, and he is a missionary in Frankfurt. And he said a veiled woman came up to him. He thought it was a beggar. He was about to give her money. But she goes, are you the imam? And he said, well, I'm not an imam, but I am the pastor of this church. And she said, well, in that case, you are the right man. God has commanded me in a dream to go to the big church on the market square and ask for the imam, meaning the priest, to tell me the truth. So I think what I find fascinating about all this is that these people who are having dreams, now Christ is a prophet in Islam. He's called Isa. But interestingly, in these dreams, these Muslims are getting the clear idea that it's not Isa, that it's in fact the Christian Christ that they need to be following, and following through the mechanism of the Christian Bible and the Christian church. It's a little bit hard to know what to make about this, but I think it's thrilling for us as Christians to see that Muslims, who are the hardest people in the world to convert, Islam hasn't really lost the force of its original revelation. I don't entirely know what to make about these strange visitations and dreams, but they seem to be real enough to the people who have them to suggest at least the possibility that God is doing some remarkable work in the.
Okay, I'll just come back to you.
That's quite powerful. Actually, that is very powerful.
I've had a few Muslims contact me, or ex-Muslims, telling me that very thing. I don't know if you've had that.
I've heard it from others. That's the odd thing. I've heard it from others. I've heard mention of this before.
Yeah. As Vinius says, fastest growing church is in Iran. So it's amazing what's going on. I suppose the thing is, where people are not able to act to evangelize in these countries, then God intervenes, and it's an amazing thing that we're witnessing that, and it's an amazing time that we're alive. I think all of us here, in the little things that we can do, can help contribute to that, particularly on the internet.
I was told this week, two people. In the last 2 weeks, it was mentioned to me that two people had left Islam. Well, one guy was considering leaving Islam. He joined Islam, and after listening to my stuff, said he needs to go back to the church. He needs to, an Irish person, actually.
Fantastic.
And then the other one was an ex-Muslim who stated that my information was the final decider for him, because when he saw what was in the Sharia, he said this cannot be from God.
Yeah, that's great. I think Islam feeds on ignorance. And the more knowledge we can give out there, hopefully you can get past that.
Mandated in the Sharia, they have to be ignorant.
Yeah, it's not by accident that they're ignorant. Yeah. I'll just have a look at some of the comments. Let's see here. In Revelation, the angels of God will preach the gospel to the entire world. It's happening. There we go. Yeah, we're kind of living through apocalyptic times. So I suppose that I've just shown you all the little videos I wanted to kind of share with you. I'm sure there's many more, and maybe we might do some more at a later stage. But I think the big one that's been sort of on our minds, collective minds, over the last few weeks is the connection between Islam and, say, Ottoman times. Sorry, Islam and the Protestant Revolution in the 16th century. It first kind of jumped out at me, perhaps, even though I think you might have mentioned it before, but when I was looking at the Dome of the Rock inscriptions, one of the things that struck me a few weeks ago was that there seemed to be a doxology that you find at the end of the Our Father, and I kind of scratched my head and said, why is there kind of like a variation of this? For thine is the kingdom, the power and glory, that part, that comes in. Now, I've often heard Protestants say, you Catholics, you don't say that in the Our Father, even though it is actually part of the Mass since 1970. But looked into it, and it turned out that it was only in the 16th century that was introduced into Bibles, and the Greek, some Greek manuscripts had it, and the earlier Bibles didn't have it. And I think what happened was it was a doxology that was used in the Eastern Church, and then it became so part and parcel of what you say when you say the Our Father that it was introduced into the Bible there. And then when the West interacted with the Greek Christians in the 15th and 16th centuries, around the time of the Reformation, they seem to have brought that into the translations for the Bible. Do you want to share some of your insights that?
Yeah, if I can do a handful of things, if I can share mine,
Yeah.
and then I just maybe talk about a few things before I jump into the
please do.
main issue. Okay, hold on, let me go here. A couple of interesting things.
Do you need me to share to the stream here?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm busy. So a couple of things. I've been saying for some time now that Islam is a Gnostic religion. I was very surprised when 12 days ago this video came out, literally the day after I did my show on Hitler and Christianity. I did a preview show on Hitler's religion.
Yeah.
And he bluntly stated that Hitler, that the Nazi party effectively were Gnostics. Now, while doing so, which was very, very interesting because I brought up a Gnostic connection to the Nazi party as well, to their Gnostic beliefs. He also stated bluntly, he glossed over it like he didn't really want to dwell on it and discuss it, but he stated the Quran is Gnostic.
Well,
He said the Gnostic Quran. Now, I've been saying this for years, right?
Yeah.
But I just found it very strange that this channel with hundreds of thousands of subs said this. But now there's a but. There's one thing that he said. He then said that the book of John was Gnostic. And then he said the book of John is Gnostic. The book of John is Gnostic, right? Now, I know for a fact the book of John, and I've covered it within my talks on Gnosticism and Islam, that the book of John is a refutation of Gnosticism. In fact, many scholars state that it was written at the request of various church leaders for John to write this book specifically to denounce Gnosticism and defend Christianity.
Yeah.
Of actual Gnosticism. So then I had a look. In this comment, he has a pinned comment on his video. Two of my sources specifically state that John was a Gnostic. If you read the Apocryphon of John, you will see that he directly receives gnosis from Jesus, giving him the power to predict the future. And this is an egregious error. Now, look, I like this channel. I watch his stuff. I've learned a great deal from him about history, about socialism, about Nazism, and that's fantastic. This, though, and when someone said, hold on, but the book of John is anti-Gnostic and the Apocryphon is not a book in the canon of the Bible, he was like, well, if I made an error, it's okay, whatever, too bad, move on. He was cavalier about it. He was dismissive of it. And he says, but my sources said it. This is an egregious error for someone who has a channel that discusses this. The Apocryphon of John is a Gnostic text. It is not a first century book of the canon.
Yeah.
Right?
How could he make such a mistake? Yeah, this
is egregious. Now, when he to such a flippant response, such a dismissive response, and I would hate to think that it was malicious or deliberate, right? But I don't know what source he used, but the Secret Book of John is a Sethian Gnostic mythology. It presents an early version of the Gnostic myth of creation. It is a pseudo-Christian text. It consists of a discourse and disclosure of Jesus within the framework of a dialogue with John. Now, here's the thing. All of these Gnostic texts are called the Gospel of Jesus, the Gospel of Paul, the Gospel of Mark, right? Because if they called it the Gospel of Frankie who lived on the corner, no one would care.
Yeah.
Right? If it was the Gospel of Mickey who lived down the street, everyone go, like, who's that? So they had to associate them with names of people established in the Bible so that they could try and associate some credibility, legitimacy with it. And for him to think that the Apocryphon of John is the book of John, because he did not say in the video, the Apocryphon of John, he said the book of John. So it gives a mythological account of the creation, the fall, the salvation of the world, and people within the world, featuring Sophia in the role of the wisdom of God. I don't think we feature Sophia, so hold on. We'll jump here quickly, and I will actually go into, if I may. So the book talks about the Babylognostics or Babylonites. Okay, so sorry, you have the Babylonites who seem to be the Babylognostics, who seem to be the ones most associated with this book because they had the same ideas, the same mythology. It's a mythological account of the creation, the fall, and the salvation of the world and the people within the world, featuring Sophia in the role of the wisdom of God. Sethian Gnostics have considered it part 2 of the gospel. And they speak of a God who emanates, a God that emanates, creates, falls, and God finally is saved. You see, because he emanates and he loses power, he's attacked by the dark god, parts
Yeah.
of him fall into the world, and we've got to kill all the humans so that we can collect all of the spirit matter, send it back into heaven, reconstitute God, and effectively you are God. And then when you save man, you save God because man is God. That is not Christian theology by any means. You have the Father of old, called the One, the invisible virgin spirit. Okay, fine. You have the four heavenly luminaries, Harmozel, Aroel, Deviathai, and Eleleth. Yeah, those guys are mentioned in the book of Matthew, page 1, I'm sure. Then you have the Geradamas, Adam the stranger, the heavenly human, Sophia and Yaldabaoth. Yeah, of course, we know who that is. The offspring or the seed of Seth, the unshakable race, the Sethian Gnostics. Last I checked, those guys are not known as Orthodox Christians. Maybe they are, I don't know, like South Mississippi Baptists, who knows, but not familiar with them at all. And
the Sethians are Egyptian, are they?
Sethian Gnostics. So Seth is in the, it's within the Seth is within the canon, but within the Apocrypha, within the Deuterocanon. That the Catholic Church still holds and that the Eastern Orthodox holds, like the Tawahedo Church of Ethiopia. And the Muslims actually regard Seth and Enoch as important because they received inspiration in a book from God. I think Enoch received 50 books from God.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're still important to Muslims. And for instance, look at this. The Father gazed into Barbelo with the pure light surrounding the invisible spirit and its radiance. Barbelo conceived from it and produced a spark of light similar to the blessed light, but not as great. This was the only child of the mother father that had come forth. I don't think that's anywhere Christian.
No.
And this guy makes this quote unquote mistake.
Yeah, no, that's too big of a mistake to be.
So for me, that is a serious concern. That's a serious concern. Then I want to bring.
I wonder, has he got an agenda? Is I wonder, is he intentionally spreading misinformation for?
Look, I don't want to accuse him of that. I've really enjoyed the guy's channel. I've learned a great deal. I've watched hours of it, but this is egregious. This is not a minor mistake.
Yeah.
And if he's an atheist, then I can see him being malicious towards Christianity or dismissive or careless, neglect or just negligent, because this seems to constitute the atheist approach to Christianity.
Because the problem is these errors can get spread so easily and get stuck in people's minds, and maybe even for years. So it's very hard to undo the damage of these sort of mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, a couple of other things. So this I got today, as we all saw. So I got sent this today by a Christian. By the power of the Holy Spirit that lives in me, I order your mouth and hands to be paralyzed for 3 days as discipline for your arrogance and pride in Jesus' name. Next one will be more severe. It will be fire from heaven that will strike you. So go report me to Yahoo and watch my blah, blah, blah. Repent to bear the consequence of your ego.
My God.
Yes. Yeah, this is a Christian that is, doing voodoo on me, as far as I can tell. This is not Christian. This is clearly misguided. And so not everyone who quotes in you. I mean, this guy's emailed me a dozen times, and I think he's upset I didn't respond to him.
Unfortunately, in this sort of line of work, there's a lot of crazies out there, and they need attention, And it's interesting. He or she uses the word ego. Maybe there's a bit of psychological projection on his or her part. That is their own ego that maybe is the issue.
Look, I mean, I can't entertain everyone's pet theory, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty horrible thing to do. I think the person would use their time more constructively to learn how to spell some basic English words, but the person
and
maybe
not to type in all caps, but okay.
Yeah. I did a technical English course once, and one of the takeaways from it was never use all caps in sentences, And to this day, I just cannot even look at it when it's there.
Yeah, and another thing that I want to bring people's attention to, I've got this quote here: "Bet you $5 there's a connection." Right? This is Aleister Crowley, arch Satanist, very famous Satanist, Freemason, very, very famous founder of a religion called Thelema. an Egyptian-based religion. So let's see. He received revelation from a angel god being, right, who dictated a book to him, and he wrote the book that he got from the dictation. Does that story sound familiar?
That sounds very familiar to me. Yeah.
That an angel visited him, gave him dictation, and he wrote a book.
Yeah.
That is the final revelation that replaces all other revelations.
Yeah, maybe.
Does it sound familiar?
Maybe this is the final one.
Yeah, I think this is the final. So this is Aleister Crowley, and he is very well known in atheist circles for his religion of Thelema. And do what thou wilt is the whole in the law. I may have misquoted that slightly, but let's just say that when I go through the videos on it, they'll mention, you go through Wikipedia or you go through other videos, they'll mention, he went to Egypt, looked at Islam, then he went on his way, had a McDonald's, never looked back.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a mouse. Oh, that's a squirrel. Let's go look at the squirrel. That's the discussion around him.
Yeah.
This man was neck deep into Islam.
Yeah.
This man was neck deep. He was doing his 5 daily prayers, blah, blah, blah. And I think I just find it very convenient that everybody has overlooked this little fact, this tiny, tiny little fact. And let's just say there's a lot more details there that seem to have gone just overlooked, but probably just by accident. Your thoughts, Mel?
I don't know a whole lot about him, but it seems that his fascination with Gnosticism fitted very nicely with his fascination with Islam. He didn't seem to find anything in Islam that says, no, you shouldn't be into Gnosticism. So that might indicate to me, just on a superficial level, that maybe Islam is quite a Gnostic religion, which is why it led him down that path.
Yeah, but, he is very, very Gnostic. He is definitely in that. And I mean, this guy, Sufism as well. He was deep into Sufism, and also he liked Islam. He disparaged Christianity. He spoke very positively of Islam, just like exactly the way the Nazis did, exactly the way that Hitler did, which obviously proves that he's a Christian, that the Nazis were Christians, that Hitler was a Christian, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
But he was very disparaging of Christianity and very, very positive. And also he extolled the magic in Islam. Islam's a cult aspect, and he got that from the Sufis, which I've been talking about.
Yeah.
And we will be discussing and diving deeper into that aspect.
Did you discover the magic in Islam prior to hearing about this guy?
Yeah, long before. I've been talking about it for years. I've been telling people about it. I haven't gone into any depth on it, but I've been saying that when you read, for instance, through the Encyclopedia of Islam, 45% of the entries all have references to occultism, magic spells, incantations, rituals. They take the same terms Muslims use, and they say, oh, by the way, here's the magical application of it, here's the incantations, here's rituals, here's the occult aspect of it.
Yeah, I stayed once at an Airbnb that was been run by a Muslim, and there was what you call those hands that are kind of the ward off evil, or was it the eye? I can't remember. One of those
the eye.
I don't know, was it the eye or is there a hand? I can't remember, but it's basically to ward off evil, and it was dotted all around the house. Thankfully, I was only staying there for one night, but I didn't really like it now.
There's a lot more going on here than people realize, and this is something I'll be tackling in the future. And then finally, okay, so this is where this gets controversial, and already it's been causing a little bit of a revolt in my comment section. It's been causing a bit of a revolt. Guys, maybe you need to ignore Syed Case Pure Arab Breed. I mean, he could be trolling. He could actually be a Christian that's trolling Islam, maybe stop getting distracted with that conversation. Maybe silence him for a minute so we can stay on topic now. So this has been causing. So I'm going to read this then and add a few additional details. But this is Suleiman the Magnificent, and the article says Savior of European Protestantism. Suleiman the Magnificent was the 10th and the longest reigning sultan of the Ottoman Empire from 1520 to 1566. He invaded or conquered 15 European countries, including Belgrade, Rhodes, Hungary, Serbia, Croatia, Transylvania, Moldavia, Wallachia, and Vienna. Protestant princes of German states received money from Suleiman the Magnificent in their efforts to establish Lutheranism in Germany in 1555. In other words, he bankrolled Protestantism. Many historians note that Protestantism would never have succeeded in Europe without Suleiman's support. Now, I've had anonymous people in the comment section telling me this is wrong because anonymous people in the comment section are always right.
Yeah.
Right. The Sultan also offered his help to the Lutheran princes from the Netherlands. Okay, fascinating. Daniel Goffman, American professor of history and Ottoman expert, claims that the major factor for the expansion of Lutheranism in Europe was the Ottoman Empire, which directly encouraged Protestantism, as in northern Hungary and Transylvania, where Calvinism, known as Calvino-Turkism, became the dominant religion.
Before you go into a bit deeper, according to A.J. Juice, the inscriptions were put in the Dome of the Rock in the same time frame that these conquests are happening. So he would argue that the reason why those inscriptions are there, if they're an anti-Christian polemic, it would fit with the idea that Suleiman is basically announcing to the world his intention to conquer Christianity. And the best way to conquer Christianity, because Christianity was really strong in Europe up to that point, is to divide and conquer, create factions. It's it's the art of war,
Correct.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fully correct. I fully support you there. Yeah. And now, the French Calvinist faction argued that an alliance with the Ottomans must be used against Catholic Spain. Now, what is interesting is that people will comment and say, "Well, Lloyd, and they'll go off on some tangent. Look, first of all, this is not all the information I have. Okay, I may or may not have hundreds, if not thousands, of pages on the topic. The sad fact is that people don't even correctly read 10 sentences. I'm not gonna be pasting 500 pages. Two, I may actually have spent more time looking at this than just pasting this up. Right? There might be more information behind this that people aren't familiar with. But now the Ottomans knew that by encouraging Protestantism everywhere, they would force the Habsburgs, that's effectively the Catholic Empire, to divide their forces. Thus, the Turks and the Protestants of the 16th century probably saved one another. So I'm going to go a little deeper into this. And I did this just to annoy people because that's what I do. Islam or Protestantism. Okay. So I'm going to go here into the comments, and these are some of my comments. Okay. So Chrislam. Now I deliberately use this with Chrislam. Okay. This is another. Now here's another thing. What I find crazy is if you go into the description here, actually, okay, we will find that I actually very openly show that there's this link here to an article, okay, because this is, and then also even within this, within the description here, if I go and read more, I actually link to this guy, Daniel Goffman, American professor. And then I also link here to the actual article, the paper that I was using, the academic paper, and I link to it. Now, very low IQ people will come and say, Lloyd, you did not provide references. Lloyd, you provided no academic references. I'm like, look, you clearly didn't read the article. Lloyd, you provided no references, you gave no names, you gave no links, you gave no sources. You're just making it up, Lloyd. I'm like, man, I just mentioned this guy, Daniel Goffman, American professor, and then I gave the name of the paper, and I've got the link right there. Like, Lloyd, you provided nothing. I'm like, I'm sorry, but if you can't even bother to actually click on the read more and then go look through it and see that I actually provided the actual citation, I can't help you. And I'm not going to engage with you because I'm sorry.
It's low IQ stuff,
Exactly. So anywho, so on this point, so I'll make a couple of points here.
Can I just say one thing? I'm just going to say, I'm going to predict something. That word Chrislam may enter the dictionary at some stage. So, folks, you've seen it here first.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
So in this highly effervescent, now this is a quote from a paper, okay? Now, also, I want to make note that there's a lot of information that is not available in English. We need to understand this. I have now started to get access to papers in French, in Dutch, there's some stuff. And in fact, even in Slavic languages, I'm now able to get access to papers in Slavic languages, and I'm starting to look through them because there's a great deal of history that, oddly enough, is not just in English.
Yeah.
And we now have, so moving on. In this highly effervescent century, with the advent of the Reformation, the most dear word of that period was reform. Now, politicians love to use the word reform, and how they mean reform and how we think reform might be two vastly different things. With the meaning of renovation, reorganization, not only of the Roman Catholic Church, but also of states, education, and politics. Like Marx wanted to bring reform, the communists brought reform, right? in general under the auspices of that strange religion called Calvino-Turkism. I think this is a paper from Romania or Bulgaria. A bizarre connection at first glance between the West and the East, between Islam and Christianity, at the confluence between the two worlds, on these places full of history of Transylvania, the edict of religious tolerance in Turda. Now, what I learned from this is that when academics speak of religious tolerance, this became a period of religious tolerance, of pluralism, where people were allowed to follow their religion without the strictures and the oppression of the Catholic Church, and people were allowed to freely worship as they felt. In other words, paganism, Gnosticism, heresy ran rampant. This is what they mean by tolerance. In other words, men cannot have babies. You put on a wig and you're a girl, okay? And
actually,
sorry, that's what they mean. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Just on that, I saw a quote there earlier on today. I'll just read it to you, which is to do with this. Evil preaches tolerance until it is dominant, then it tries to silence good.
Correct. Yes, correct. And when these academics use the word tolerance, they don't mean it the way we mean it. So they mean like Satanism, that's okay. Wicca, witchcraft, go for it, because that's tolerance. That's having no limits, no borders, no boundaries, no strictures. In other words, anything that violates Christian doctrine, anything that violates Christian morals, that's good. Tolerate it. Okay. And I mean, sadly, because of this, without wanting to offend people, but I'm going to try and make a very, very blunt point. Christianity, because of overt tolerance, has become the religion where you're too afraid to offend the adults who want to sodomize your 3-year-old.
Yeah.
You don't want to say anything against them in case it'll offend them. So sorry, I cannot accept that. So anyway, this place consented to the 4 accepted religions: Lutheranism, Calvinism, Catholicism, and Unitarianism, which is anti-Trinitarian heresy. This is anti-Trinitarianism. And we're going to have a quick look at this one. Yeah, sorry?
I'm just going to say, and that one in particular is a foot in the door for Islam.
We're going to look at that. We're going to see exactly how and why.
Yeah.
But also the union of 1600, the unification of Mihai Viteazu. Okay, short story though on this. Let's just say that heresy ran rampant, and the Ottomans were bankrolling this stuff and influencing this stuff.
Of course they would, yeah.
And are these pure coincidences, or are we able to distinguish certain cause-effect correlations between them? There's the link. I don't know what this blind guy was, but whatever. They don't want to see things, okay? Now, let me continue here. So Calvino-Turkism refers to the multifaceted relationship between Protestant Reformation and Ottoman authorities. They had a multifaceted relationship. They were being ecumenical, and there was open dialogue. No. Okay, which contributed to the consolidation of Protestantism in Europe. The term was coined in 1597 by English Catholic exiled in continental Europe in response to accusations of Papismo-Turkism by an Anglican. Okay, but now let me go have a look here. There was something that I wanted to add about this. Okay, here. Some Anabaptists believed that a multi-faith church was possible. A multi-faith church is possible where Muslims, Jews, and pagans could coexist.
Yeah.
Anabaptist leaders, such as Melchior Hoffman, blah, 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 believed in the possibility of this multi-faith church and even appreciated the Muslims. Let's just say Muslims, right? So this is now Jacob Paleologu, a Unitarian, saw Muslims as Turkish Christians. He saw them as Turkish Christians.
Wow.
He called for universal religious tolerance. He formulated and propagated a heterodox version of Christianity, in other words, a heresy, in which Jesus Christ was not to be mentioned in worship.
Wow.
You were not to speak the name of Jesus in worship. And where supposed irreconcilable differences between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism were rejected as spurious fabrications. In other words, there is no difference between these three. There is no difference. Anything that causes difference, that these nasty artificial differences have to go.
Yeah.
So, in other words, so what he did was, so he's basically stated, and I have more on this, but he basically stated that he was creating what he called the universal religion. And he stripped from Christianity anything that conflicted with Islam.
Do you know that there's a project, I think it was in Abu Dhabi, of building 3 churches
Yes.
with Judaism, Christianity, well, Catholicism, and
Yes.
Islam. It's the same thing again. It's the same project.
Yes,
really
and they've been
crazy.
at this for a very long time. Now, sadly,
Yeah.
we can trace these ideas through the Reformation as a political maneuver, as an entirely heretical maneuver, and this links into Calvinism, and we can start to trace a line into Wycliffe. We can start to trace a line into Jan Hus. We can start to trace a line into Martin Luther. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
now for me, looking at this is extremely disturbing. This is
Yeah.
extremely disturbing. And this is now look, yeah, everyone, my channel, I will be investigating this. I will be talking about this.
It has to
I
be.
am not going to be pulling punches on this. Okay.
Yeah.
And I just did a talk on Martin. Every time I think Martin Luther, I think Hitler, because the two are so intimately connected.
Yeah.
But I did a talk on Martin Luther, and what I'm tired of is that I keep getting told, Lloyd, you can't trust the literal word of the Quran. You can't take Muhammad's literal words in the Quran. You see, you have to reinterpret it, because you see you have to interpret it the correct way. And even though Luther, how did I confuse the two? Even though Luther might have condoned lying, even though he said lying is okay, even though he condoned it for his followers, that was his personal sin, and you can't hold it against all the Muslims, right, that followed Muhammad, right? And even though he condoned polygamy and he said it's okay, that was his personal mistake, and you can't hold it against him. You can't say that. And even though he endorsed slaughtering bunches of peasants, and even though he wrote tracts that had millions of Jews murdered, that you can't hold. Look, I'm sorry, but the standard Protestant propaganda to defend Martin Luther is literally the same as the propaganda Muslims use to defend Muhammad. And I'm stating this bluntly. I am sick and tired of listening to it, because there's nothing so egregious. Martin Luther edited the Bible. He literally edited the words and the sentences in the Bible, and he took books out and shoved them at the back in an appendix, hoping to get rid of them because they contradicted his theology. This is not the action of a man who is orthodox. This is the action of a heretic. I'll stop.
If he was living it today, he'd be labeled a crazy Catholic priest, because that's what he was at the time.
Say again, please. If
he would have been labeled. Well, like we view him through the lens of Protestantism has gone on for the last 500 years, but contemporary to that time, he would have been viewed as a crazy priest gone off on one.
Yeah, actually, someone today was telling me 2 hours ago, saying, well, Lloyd, Martin Luther was acting in concordance with the spirit of the time, and you can't use your modern sensibility to judge him. You have to look at the milieu that he was in, and within that time, that was acceptable behavior. That was a common thing, and therefore he was acting purely within custom and tradition of the day. I mean, now hold on. Abdul's tell me every day, well, you can't judge Muhammad's diddling 6-year-old Aisha on the standards of the 20th century, because that was common standards of the day. I'm sorry, you are using Abdul arguments on me.
Yeah.
Right. So no.
Someone has pointed out that they have a statue of Luther in the Vatican.
Oh,
Francis is a fan. Francis has a scarf around the statue,
dude,
and even his theology is so similar. It's crazy, but.
When the old joke is the Pope a Catholic, now it's a very, very serious question
mark. But we're all this is not against any particular denomination, folks. We're all in this in the muck together here. We're just trying to establish the truth here. You know? So don't feel too bad if your particular denomination is getting a hammer in here. I think we're all sharing it.
Yeah. No, Sean Jones, Igor Shafarevich writes about the link of the Middle Ages heretical groups and how they were socialist. And that's actually a very good point. I've read Igor Shafarevich. I have notes on Igor Shafarevich. I have slideshows that I'm busy working on. I just haven't had a chance to do all of it. I'm working on like a dozen different slideshows all at once. And Igor Shafarevich is critical information. Nicodemus Hericus had no idea about any of that stuff. But the 95 Thesis on the church door is probably a propaganda story, because it only started surfacing 30 years after he died. And it was probably spread by Melanchthon. So it's very likely never happened.
Wow, yeah. But yeah, he's a bit of a rascal, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Paul says he prays for Francis' conversion every day. Yeah, it would be nice if Francis were Christian.
It would. Yeah, it's
if you were Catholic, even it would be great if Pope were Catholic.
Yeah. I'm dreaming of the day when I kind of wake up from a dream and it's like, oh no, that was all just a dream, Dallas style. But,
so Mel, sorry, I've spoken a lot. I mean, maybe I should let you have a go here. But what are your thoughts on this? I mean,
I was doing a little bit of research into the similarities between Islam and Calvinism, expecting to find one or two similarities. I don't know if you have seen this material, but I could share a presentation. I'll just go through some of the similarities. You probably have seen these.
Yeah, let me stop sharing. So but in those, okay.
Okay, so I'm using the term Mohammedism here. Did Mohammedism influence Calvinism? Well, I had an open mind going into this. I was looking at this over the course of today, and actually by the end of it, I'm thinking, even though there's no direct evidence that he went to a Muslim country or read Muslim books, but in terms of his theology, it's incredibly similar to many aspects of Islam, to the point where he must have been influenced, in my view. So see what you think yourself. Just go through these. So before Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli is a key person. I think it's pronounced iconic. Yeah, so the idea of not employing or permitting images. The Zwingli's theology was strongly iconic.
Against icons. He was part of the what do they call it? The iconoclastic heresy, where they said that any icons are heresy, which is actually oddly enough just like Islam, because they don't have any icons in their mosques.
No, and one of the telltale signs with the Reformation is that they took over the churches and whitewashed them. They just destroyed all the images. They pulled out all the statues and all the rest of it. Now, just in relation to that, then, I've taken this from Peter Marshall, the Oxford History of the Reformation. He says, while Luther reformed rituals and symbols cautiously and continued to believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the Swiss revamped worship from top to bottom, rejecting belief in all material points of contact with the divine as idolatry, following Zwingli's pronouncement, finitum non est capus infiniti, the finite cannot convey the infinite. In practice, the core of normative religion in Islam is consistently iconic or iconoclastic, essentially. So there's one point of similarity, just starting off.
Yeah, that is odd, because idolatry has certain rules. There's a logic to idolatry. You have to do a ceremony where you open the mouth of the idol. You call the god down, and the god comes and he lives in the idol. The idol is not the god. The idol is a home for the god, and the idol can be destroyed, and the god will simply move to the next idol that you create, or the next home that you create for them. So there's a very clear difference between veneration and idol worship, and people too easily confuse the two, and I think that's a deliberate propaganda strategy.
Yeah, and it's very good on the simple-minded, the double-digit IQ people who just can't see the distinction of things. So Zwingli's Zurich has earned a reputation as a theocracy. That is a state in which ultimate authority is held by those who represent God. Does that sound like anything to you? It sounds very like Sharia. Yeah, it's now in reality this meant that civil laws were in accordance with the Bible, which is fair enough, and the civil authorities had the power to enforce all discipline, even beyond the realm of what we would call crimes, into religious misdemeanors and so forth.
That is the Sharia. Can we just pause for 1 second? There's a guy called YNM2J, and he goes, Alexander Tsipovich, Luther was not anti-Semitic, he was anti-devil. Now this guy is calling Jews devils. He's repeating word for word what Luther repeated, because Luther was anti-Semitic. But not only that, he happens to be repeating the same words as Marx, Lenin, Stalin, as well as Hitler himself. Hitler, if you've spent 5 minutes reading Mein Kampf, you'll discover that Hitler was incredibly foul in his language, as was Luther. Luther was a very foul man, very foul man. And this guy is now he's in exactly the same company as Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, some of the worst people in history, and he's not trying to claim that those guys are right? Those guys that actually are guilty of mass murder, of major atrocities. Those guys are right, and he's actually defending their point of view.
Yeah,
and obviously
that's
he's got the
tenable.
picture of Jesus there.
Yeah, no, that's
I mean,
bad. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, these people are just. I mean, he's a Nazi. Let's be blunt. You are repeating, you are endorsing Nazi propaganda, and you claim to be Christian. That's shameful.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope someone does make a clip of this and it makes it look like you're saying that to me. That's it's to the person in the comment section.
No, I'm not saying that to you. No, but yeah, the thing is, Nicodemus just mentioned fascism. Look, fascism is its own ideology. It is related to socialism. It's a step beyond. It's a more strict version of socialism, if you will, and it is still socialism, but it's got its own particular ideology. It's there were different versions of socialism. The Soviets had one version of it, then the Nazis had their version of socialism, and they were socialists, and then the Italians had a particular version of socialism as well, with their little distinctions.
Yeah. Okay, so so we got the theocracy there, and then we have this other one. Now we're moving on to Calvin himself. So reward and punishment were essential to God's relationship with these people. Calvin's God demanded his proper glory along with obedience. That's a key word there. Rewarding those who gave him his due and punishing those who dared not to. Now, so in Islam, you know this better than me. Tawab is the reward which God grants to his faithful servants in return for their faith and good deeds. And I think it's Al-Kab is the punishment that an unbeliever or sinner receives for his unbelief. So that to me sounds very similar, just on the surface level at least. The idea of punishing God.
Reward and punishment is one of the foundations of the Sharia.
Yeah.
Reward and punishment. In fact, one of the foundations of Islam. That is reward and punishment. Which is basically where you've got the term barakat, where you earn reward and you receive punishment based on that. And this is works based. That is crazy. This is wow.
There's a kind of a bifurcation of what was the traditional Christian idea of salvation. So Lutheranism took up the grace idea, and they said, okay, you're saved by faith and grace. And then Calvinism basically took the good works side of things and said, no, you're just saved by works, essentially. Whereas the traditional was a combination of both. The works were not works on their own part, but they were kind of a sign of true repentance or a true faith. So you couldn't have a faith without good works, because without good works connected to your faith was hollow and fake, essentially.
Faith without works is dead. I mean, that's
it. Yeah. So, so the influence of Islam, I think, here would be splitting that connection and creating a dichotomy between the two that wasn't there for the best part of 15 centuries. You know.
I'm actually trying to find this tawab. This will be very interesting to try and find these terms. Tawab.
Yeah.
And the other one was ikra, but tawab should be easy to find.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was a nai or an L there. I thought it was al-kab, but maybe it's ikab. You're right.
Should be ikra, but let me see if I'll just go through my software and find tawab. Okay, there's. Oh, there it comes up. Okay, but yeah, I'll get to it in a moment. Yeah, now you can continue. I'll just look it up and discover.
Yeah, no,
God gave them the reward of this world, a reward from Allah. Yeah, it's reward.
Yeah,
in one view.
Okay, so Sasha says Eastern Church says it's synergy between faith and works. Faith produces works, and works strengthen the faith. Excellent. Yeah, I think the Western Church viewed it that way. They might word is slightly different, but essentially the same view on that, which is good. Okay, so just moving on from there then. So the next aspect is to do with sovereignty of God. Okay, so no one will dispute that God is sovereign. He alone possesses the divine attributes, and they're all there. But how does the sovereignty of God play out in his dealings with mankind? And here we see another startling similarity between Islam and Calvinism. Okay, so we have determinism. The sovereignty of Allah in Islam and God in Calvinism is absolutely deterministic. They are the author of every action, word, and thought, including sin and evil. Moreover, they predetermined before time everything that shall occur in time, including who will be given the gift of faith and eternal life, and who will not be condemned to eternal life.
Wow, that is so Islamic,
isn't it?
Yeah, man, this is wow.
I'm surprised you don't know, you weren't aware of this one. Yeah, isn't incredible? Like, I don't know how many we've got so far. This is like 3 or 4 really strong similarities. Now, when I read the Quran for the first time, and it was a horrible read, I'm free to admit, I kept seeing this deterministic thing all the way through. It's so much part of what Islam is. That it's the blood of Islam, essentially.
Yeah.
And that
is pause a moment. Yeah. This guy, Wine, I just mentioned, look, Luther edited the Bible. Now, apparently it's okay to edit the Bible as long as your name is Martin Luther. You can literally rip books out. Now, what is crazy, that hypocritical Protestants state that the Bible is the only source of authority. Therefore, it's okay if Luther rips the Bible apart, removes books he disagrees with because those books contradict Luther. Okay, because Luther's greater than the Bible, and
greater than God.
Sorry, yeah,
and greater than God, presumably, if he can.
Of course, if he can edit the Bible, because Luther decided these books were wrong, they need to go, and he shoved them. He tried to remove them from the Bible, but he couldn't, so he put them in the back of the Bible. Y and M to J, right? So Luther removed certain books from the Bible, stuck them in an appendix, hoping to get rid of them permanently because they disagreed with Martin Luther, and Martin Luther couldn't have the Bible disagreeing with him, now could he? No. Then he went and edited the Bible. He actually edited sentences in the Bible to change the actual verses. He actually went and edited verses. Martin Luther endorsed lying, okay? He recommended and endorsed lying for his followers. He said lying is perfectly fine. So that the Sharia also endorses lying. Muhammad endorsed lying. And now he's saying, well, you can't blame, it's just one man. It's like I said, you are arguing exactly like a Muslim. There is nothing that, look, some Protestants, I'll say bluntly, worship Martin Luther. We know that Muslims worship Muhammad. Some Protestants worship Martin Luther. There is nothing that he can do. There is no list. You'll say, you see, because, well, he only did this, right? Yeah, but the thing is, when you start lining up, he did 100 major sins, right? Then you go like, well, it's actually, you'll find an excuse for everything. Because look, you worship the man. Let's be blunt. You will excuse any and every sin and every heresy. Because Martin Luther, he can edit the Bible. It's okay.
I think, in my view, it's fair game to criticize any theologian within your church, and I do on a regular basis, because they are human. Their theologies aren't always good, and I think Martin Luther was a particularly poor theologian,
a terrible theologian. I'm sorry, but look, I have, after reading about Martin Luther, I have lost all respect for the man. I have this much respect for him.
Yeah. Now, in case people get the wrong idea, we're not saying this because we're taking a sectarian position on this. It's purely looking at the reality of the people and their theology, and there's nothing beyond that.
Look, I'm not even Catholic, so
another point here: sola scriptura and prima scriptura sound like Bible adultery. It is putting the Bible way too high. I suppose the tradition was that it was in the Bible was placed in the context of other things, so it wasn't on its own on a pillar above everything else. It was balanced out with other things, maybe. Okay, so anyway, we have the sovereignty there, and let's move on to the next part.
Sorry, that is so Islamic.
So, Calvinist church historian Philip Schaff writes, Calvinism starts with a double decree of predestination which antedates and is the divine program of human history. This program includes the successive stages of the creation of man, a universal fall, emphasis on that one, and condemnation of the human race, a partial redemption and salvation, all for the glory of God and display of his attributes of mercy and justice. History is only the execution of the original design. Now, note that he does not shy away from affirming that God himself decreed the fall of man and is therefore the author of sin. Does this sound like another religion to you? The idea that God has designed
God decrees
that
your sin. God decrees who will come to him and who will not, and whose ears are going to be closed. This is very Islamic. I mean, really, there's a parallel, strong parallel here.
Yeah, and it's completely a view of human beings as merely passive agents. They are not, or not even agents. They're just passive beings.
Also, this predestination, this determinism, this is also very much in line with socialism / atheism, which are almost the same thing.
That's right. I didn't cotton that. Yeah, like if everything is
socialism and
evolutionary,
atheism are inseparable.
Yeah, yeah. If you take the 100% evolutionary line and everything is just determined, it's pretty much the same.
In fact, but this idea is also a Greek pagan idea. In fact, it stems from like 6th century, 5th century BC Greek paganism, and in fact, it's nihilist paganism coupled with sophistry. It's coupled with the sophists, so it's linked to the sophists and the nihilists. So now you're looking at Greek paganism linked to nihilists, linked to sophists. I mean, it's like, sure, how about you just throw some Satanists in there and some baby rapists, and then like you may as well, because you're already halfway there. I mean,
yeah. Okay. Let's click on. So the same view was affirmed by Calvin. By predestination, we mean the eternal decree of God by which he determined with himself whatever he wished to happen with regard to every man. All are not created on equal terms, but some are preordained to eternal life, others to eternal damnation, and accordingly, as each has been created for one or other of those ends, we say that he has been predestined to life or death.
Wow, are we talking Sharia here, or are we talking Calvinism?
Yeah. If I didn't put that bit about Calvin up on top, you'd be hard pressed to not identify it as Islam. It is so like Islam.
Yeah. Nicodemus Herpicus says, "Thank you for clarifying which Greeks, Lloyd. I very much appreciate that. Look, I wouldn't let Aristotle off the hook completely either, and Plato should be stabbed in the back at least 20 times." Okay, so seriously, I wouldn't give even the good ones too much of a pass.
Yeah.
Because you are thinking about them through a 20th century lens. They were pagans, and they endorsed things that we would consider horrific today.
Yeah. So Islam teaches the same doctrine as Calvinism. According to Islam, Allah is absolutely deterministic. As Kaner and Kaner write, one of the foundational doctrines of Islam is the absolute sovereignty to the point of determinism of Allah. Allah knows everything, determines everything, decrees everything, and orders everything. Allah is even the cause of evil. And I'm sure we could probably find plenty of verses in the Quran that points that very thing out.
I mean, look, it's early days, but this already this influence of Islamic ideas, Islamic thought, and we can tie Islamic thought directly into Hermeticism. We can tie Gnosticism and Islam, and now you've got these crazy ideas. I mean, this is frightening.
Yeah. Okay. It follows that Allah predestines all who will be saved and all who will be eternally damned. Of those who cannot be saved, Surah 2, 6-7. Now, Surah 2 is one of the earliest surahs from, as far as I can see. But anyway,
it's not
not
chronological, so we'd have to go through a list to check if it's one of the earlier ones. Because remember, it's not chronological.
No, I don't mean it in terms of chronology, but in terms of the spelling in it is older than spelling elsewhere.
So it might be then
just,
one of the earlier
just based on linguistic things, but it is the same to them whether you warn them or do not warn them. They will not believe. Allah has set a seal on their hearts and on their hearing, and on their eyes is a veil. Great is the chastisement they incur. In other words, it's all predetermined. So it's very fatalistic.
Wow, the Greeks had the very same. There are certain of the Greeks that had the same ideas, and in fact, those very same pagan ideas made their way into the Enlightenment. I mean, Enlightenment was just paganism 2.0.
Yeah. Wow. But I suppose all of these books are drifting down through the centuries, and they're re-emerging and influencing people.
The ideas are drifting, certainly, and we can. Yeah, I mean, there's history there. We'll talk about another time.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Now, in relation to fatalism, It follows that Calvinism and Islam are both inherently fatalistic. The sovereign God elects those who will be saved and rejects all others. Some are preordained to eternal life, others to eternal damnation. We say that he has been predestined to life or death. This is straight out of the writings of Calvin. God arranges all things by his sovereign counsel in such a way that individuals are born who are doomed from the womb to certain death. Okay. In the same way, Allah leads astray whom he wills and saves whom he wills. Surah 14:4. Allah is exalted and pleased as he sends people to hell. This is the fatalistic claim of Islam. Fatalism is a belief that events are fixed in advance for all time in such a manner that human beings are powerless to change them. In this case, Allah will send to heaven whoever he pleases and send to hell whoever.
Then what's the point of trying to do dawah?
Yeah, it just seems pointless, isn't it? But actually, funny enough, the point is made later is that despite this determinism, Calvinists still believe that they have to do all this missionary work and so forth and do the best they can, despite that everything is predetermined, because they believe that their actions are part of that predetermined course of action. You know,
I mean, we would to find the underlying philosophy. I mean, if we could go back and see what is the underlying philosophy, is it Gnostic, Hermetic? Is it, something? It's, is it like Egyptian belief? Is it, that'll be interesting.
Yeah. I think the key thing would be to find some reference to Calvin's not writings, but what he read and whether he had some interest in Islam. I think there was some direct reference to that, but just based on all of this so far, it looks like he was massively influenced, because if you can imagine, Calvin grew up in a Catholic family. His mother was very pious and had relics and so forth, and he just completely did a complete 180 degrees roundabout turn. I think when he was a teenager, about the age of 14, and then just suddenly hated the Christianity of his birth, but he kind of just went off on that vein, So I think something must have influenced him. But we were having a discussion before the live stream that you mentioned about that there were people that what was the way you put it? That passed messages around Europe.
Couriers, yeah. So there were couriers from Eastern Europe to as far as London, and they were looking for allies, and they were passing their heretical papers, their tracts. They were shuttling them around Europe.
Yeah. So this could be the way that those ideas got into the hands of people like Calvin. Now, the other thing that we kind of need to bear in mind as well, which is also something we often don't think about, in the previous century, the Spanish, the Portuguese had gone traveling around the world, and they discovered the Americas and so forth. And that kind of rapidly changed people's views of their inherited knowledge, because up to that point, they believed that they knew everything and everything was correct. It kind of rattles their confidence in tradition and authority. And this kind of helped set the ground for openness to hearing what those in the East had to say. So there might have been a kind of like a jadedness about the old, and a kind of an openness to what they perceived as new, or at least different and exotic, because their belief system had been kind of rattled sufficiently to be opened up to something new. Right. Now, another big area is love. Perhaps the most fundamental of all aspects of God's love character is love. There are a few obvious quotations. I don't need to delve on that too much, but we all know what the Bible teaches about love. Now, in Islam, it's obvious that love is de-emphasized. Allah is just, or seen just as a distant sovereign. He is virtually devoid of love. Kaner and Kaner lists 99 names of Allah, and only one includes a reference to love, and this only to those who are his own.
Yeah, he only loves those who love him first.
Yeah. When Allah is discussed within the Islamic community, the absence of intimacy, atonement, and omnibenevolence becomes apparent. In all the terms and titles of Allah, one does not encounter terms of intimacy. Even the most faithful and devout Muslim refers to Allah only as a servant to master. Allah is a distant sovereign. And we hear references, to the idea of being a slave to Allah and so forth. Now, surely Calvinism couldn't be anything like that, could it? But we'll see it's actually pretty much the same. What we find in Calvinism is an emphasis on his sovereignty at the expense of his love. Not once in the nearly 1,300 pages of his Institutes does Calvin extol God's love for mankind. Isn't that incredible? In 1,300 pages, a supposed Christian doesn't refer to God's love. This one-sided emphasis reveals Calvinism's primary defect, the unbiblical limitations it places upon God's most glorious attribute. Something is radically amiss at the very foundation of this unbiblical doctrine.
Wow.
Now,
God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son.
Yeah.
And not a word about it.
Not a word about it. If I go back a second just to look at some of the quotes there. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God demonstrates his own love towards us, and for God so loved the world, So if he's not getting it from the Bible, he either has a vivid imagination or he's getting it from somewhere else. And the somewhere else, I would suggest, is probably Islam, or at least some offshoot of Islam. So on what did Calvin build his theology? Let's see. Did I just cover that? I did. Sorry, 1 second. As we look closer, we find reasons for this muting of God's love in Islam and Calvinism. For example, Calvin's God and Islam's Allah are both bereft of unconditional love for everyone. Allah's heart is set against the infidel. He has no love for the unbeliever, nor is it the task of the Muslim to evangelize the unbelieving world. That part I was surprised by, considering the whole thing with dawah. So I don't know how accurate that is.
That's a lie. I mean, look, the Muslim apologetics will just lie to you, or these scholars will get it wrong. I mean, they've been like, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's probably a flaw in the argument. But Kaner and Kaner note, this is why so many Muslims quickly disown children who have converted to another religion, especially Christianity. Why love them when Almighty Allah will never love them? So that's Islam's side of things. But is this any different from Calvinism? So here's a quote. The ultimate aim of Calvinism is to prove that God does not love everyone, is not merciful to all, and is pleased to damn billions. If that is the God of the Bible, Calvinism is true. If that is not the God of the Bible, who is God of the Bible, who is love, Calvinism is false. So he talks about it in a kind of a rhetorical way there. But
wow, so he just wanted to punish.
Yeah. Do you want to go back?
He wanted to condemn and punish.
Yeah. It's a really harsh religion.
You know what I find odd is that since I'm probably annoying half of my audience, is that when you look at Luther's actual doctrines, even the Lutheran Church has distanced itself from Luther's actual doctrines.
Yeah.
And when Lutherans today talk about Luther, they're talking about their perception of Luther, the modern interpretation of Luther, not Luther's actual words, not actual Luther. And that's the same with Calvinism. Maybe Calvinists are debating their view of Calvinists through a Western lens or through a long historical lens, as opposed to the actual words of Calvin.
That tends to happen, so I'll just carry on. Apologies for my cold, everyone. I'm struggling not to sneeze every 2 minutes.
Do you want me to read this stuff? Do you want me to read it?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay, so this doctrine is openly announced in Islam. Allah loves not transgressors, Quran 2:190. For Allah loves not any ungrateful sinner. For Allah loves not those who do wrong. That is crazy, because God says, Jesus says that if you do not love those who do wrong, even tax collectors love their children. That's interesting, right? For Allah loves not the arrogant, the vainglorious. Within Calvinism, God's love is declared to be unconditional because he has given it unconditionally, not in response to anything we do. But whether or not one is actually loved in the salvific way is ultimately determined by what we do. So this is enshrined in the last 5 points of Calvinism, the perseverance of the saints, since all who are saved will inevitably persevere in a living, faithful life. So this is works, in other words. So if you work hard, you'll get loved. God's saving love in the end is determined by our works.
Yeah. So my thinking, it's kind of like in Calvinism, God is like a father that won't love you unless you prove your worth. You know?
Yeah. And it's like a narcissistic supply. You if you try, he'll be nice to you, but it gets turned off the moment you don't do something.
Yeah. So I think there are slight differences there on that one, but it's pretty much the same, isn't it? In my view, anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And then there's insecure love here. It's impossible in Calvinism and Islam to know that you are loved by God. While Calvinists proclaim their belief in eternal security, what they mean is if you are really saved, which you cannot know with absolute certainty until you die, then you will never lose your salvation. But how can you know that? Based on your works. However, the threat of falling into some sin and thus finding out that you were never really saved in the first place is a possibility hanging over the head of every Calvinist. And this is pretty much like Islam, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't know until you are in paradise that Allah won't at some point reject you.
Yeah.
You don't really know. And you still have to go through the horrors of the tortures in the grave, and you've got to go over the fire and the razor blade bridge and the thorns, and you've got to still beat up your friends and loved ones and strangers to punish them before you can enter paradise. And it's just weird, but this is very much like Islam.
Yeah.
Wow. You still don't know. Allah will cheat you at the last second.
Yeah. Do you want to take this one here?
It is impossible in Calvinism and Islam to know that you are loved by God. While Calvinists proclaim their belief in eternal security, what they mean is if you are really saved, which you cannot know with absolute certainty.
Oh, actually, I think I've just done that one. Sorry, my mistake.
You just repeated it, yeah.
I just that was the highlighted one. Sorry.
Okay, so Islam teaches the same doctrine as Calvinism. The Quran hints that the believer in Allah can be confident of his or her eternal destiny, but there is no guarantee, even for the most righteous. In Islam, the answer to the question, what must I do to go to heaven? Well, it's kill or be killed in jihad. Is mysterious and complex. No, it's not. It's kill or be killed in jihad. Islamic tradition argues that the guarantee of heaven is as impossible to find as a chaste virgin and pure speech. The devout Muslim makes every effort to please Allah and thereby obtain heaven, but fate in the hands of the all-powerful Allah will decide the outcome. The love of God is at best compromised in both Islam and Calvinism. That's why Muslims will, if they are willing to do jihad, they can guarantee heaven. They can guarantee heaven for their family.
Yeah.
So some will say up to 72 members of their family. So if you are willing to die, to kill or be killed in jihad, you guarantee heaven for up to 72 members of your family, some say.
So, is that the only really guarantee in Islam?
For lay Muslims, yes.
Yeah.
For the scholars, no. The scholars, it's different, but for lay Muslims, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now another key similarity is the violence aspect. So obviously Islam is demonstrably a religion of violence. A God who's arbitrary, distant, and devoid of love will naturally demonstrate this in violence towards whoever he chooses. Those who defy Islam, especially Christians, are beheaded and mutilated. These infidels are given 3 options: convert to Islam, leave, or face persecution, often death. Now, you might be surprised that there's something very similar to that in Calvinism. And I was actually shocked about
Can I read this?
Yeah.
The same kind of violence also showed itself in Calvin's Geneva, where rejection of Reformed dogma brought 3 options: convert to Calvinism, leave, deportation, or face persecution, imprisonment, or death. The similarity to Islam is unmistakable. In 1555, Calvin and his supporters gained absolute control in Geneva. Isn't that the year that the Sultan of Constantinople funded the Protestants?
It was, yes.
That is strange. That he sent them money. Those who disagreed with Calvin's theology were excluded from communion and fled. 4 who failed to escape were beheaded, quartered, and their body parts hung in strategic locations as a warning. Calvin referred to them as henchmen of Satan, and he justified his barbarity by saying those who do not correct evil when they can do so, and their office requires it, are guilty of it. That is word for word from the Sharia. That is word for word. That is in the Sharia.
Really?
Holy moly! Yes.
That actual quote, yeah, or a paraphrase of it.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
That's in the Sharia. That is in the Sharia. It's in the doctrine they call commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. And there's a series of steps, set of rules for how you must use.
Wow.
You must use in your heart is the weakest if you reject it in your heart and mind, but you need to speak about it. And if you can, you have to change it with your hand. And when they mean change it with your hand, they mean, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And if you do not correct it, if you allow others to do sin, then you yourself are guilty, and you will be punished by Allah.
This is probably the best piece of evidence of a direct influence, I'd say. That's so specific in terms of the Sharia.
Yeah, from 1554 until his death in 64, no one dared oppose the reformer openly. That is crazy. This is Sharia.
Yeah,
that is Sharia. I mean, wow.
Yeah, you were definitely the best person to be sharing this with, because you have that sort of knowledge, to be able to confirm that. That's great. Okay, so in conclusion then, his theology is anti-Catholic, but is also unbiblical, especially as regards God's love. It's also a deeply political ideology.
Oh my, theocratic. Interesting.
Yeah.
I know a religion that's like that.
Yeah, it bears remarkable similarities to Islam's theology. Islam's influence on the borders of Europe is rubbing off on the so-called reformers. It also benefits the Ottomans. Did they encourage this Reformation in order to divide and conquer?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so that's what I was at today. I'll just come back to you now.
Based on what I showed earlier, I mean, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a massive overlap between what both of us have been finding out independently of each other.
Yeah. I mean, look, for my audience, I'm not going out of my way to try to bash Protestantism. I am simply highlighting very uncomfortable facts.
Yeah.
To me, it's extremely uncomfortable. I don't like what I'm finding, but this is what I find. This is what I find is factually accurate.
Yeah. I think if there's bad, I'm just going to say, regardless of what Christian denomination any of our audience are in, if there's bad theology within your denomination, you're going to have to just say, well, that needs to be changed. It needs to get back to some sort of form of truth, or fundamental Christianity. That put it orthodoxy. That's a better word.
I mean, and you've got this Calvino-Turkism, which is an actual name applied to a, shall we say, a mixing of Islam and Calvinism.
Yeah. It's it's been a bit of an eye opener now, I have to say, all of the material, but so like, I think, like, kind of just bringing it all together, I think, looking at it now, I'm obviously looking at this material with a view to A.J. Juice's paper. He made some radical claims, and one of them being that the inscription, the rock, may have been created in the 16th century, and people kind of said, well, it makes no sense, because this anti-Christian polemic only makes sense in the 7th century, and it does kind of make sense in the 7th century, because that was another epoch change that was occurring. But the 16th century is also a very good fit for it, and it makes a lot of sense for Suleiman, knowing that he's trying to conquer Europe, to put these inscriptions as a kind of almost like a talisman, maybe, or like a kind of almost like a magic spell, by putting them there, kind of an anti-Christian thing, to almost like to gain extra power for his armies to conquer the lands. And the thing is, they very nearly succeeded. They're very close. I think what saved Europe was the fact that the Catholics and Protestants came to an agreement, knowing that they had a common enemy and they needed to form an alliance, and they eventually got around to that. Can't remember the details on that, but that was a little bit later. But they just about got there, but they were fooled quite a bit. But,
yeah, I mean, this is the 17th century that they finally got rid of Islam, right? 1683, the Battle of Vienna under King Jan Sobieski. and the Winged Hussars. I mean, it was the Polish that led that.
Yeah. Did you say, I don't know if it was you that said it, did some of the Protestants give material assistance to the Ottomans at that time?
So some of them allied with the Ottomans, and there was certainly some level of alliance and some level of sympathy and assistance. Yeah, I haven't looked into it in detail, but there was some level of, shall we say, collaboration.
Yeah. I know Elizabeth I formed an alliance with one of the later caliphs. I think it might be Mehmed III. I'll have to double check on that. But and it was around that time when Elizabeth I had this an alliance with the Turks. English people were fascinated with all things Turkish, so the Turkish couches and so forth, the sofas kind of got introduced. All of that,
and they call them
got introduced. What you still call the Ottomans?
Yeah, even Kabbalistic, even Luria. Like you look at Luria, 16th century Kabbalah. I mean, few people realize Islam has its own version of the Kabbalah called Kabbalah, right?
Yeah,
with the Q, right? And they get that from obviously, but if you look in the 16th century, Luria comes along with this very popularized form of common or God and Kabbalah. But if you actually have a look at it, it's very much based on the Islamic concept of like barakat. And it's works based and sending up blessings to heaven, which is based on exactly that. Like Muslims will say salam alaikum and all those things, because when you say that, you send up a spark to heaven and it goes on the scale, right? That's what it is. You're doing blessings, and it's the same idea. So this is so they infiltrated, and in fact, people look at Enlightenment as a period of rationality and reason. But if you look at those very same Enlightenment thinkers who are lauded as the champions of Enlightenment, the champions of rationality and reason and logic, these very same people were neck deep into the occult.
Yeah. So there was a massive level of hypocrisy. They were denying the spiritual realm publicly, but actually they were, as you say, deep in it.
In the occult.
Yeah.
And Islam, unfortunately, is also very much a Gnostic religion, has very dense magic. And as Crowley showed, it is deep into the magic, and it introduced its version of it. And people are fascinated with these things from the East.
Yeah. Before the live stream, just as a kind of a more modern parallel to what we've been talking about today, in the middle of the 20th century, communist Russia tried to undermine the West by setting up things like the Frankfurt School, which was like a think tank of academics. And they're the ones that have produced all the wokeism that we see today. It's taken decades for those ideas to disseminate into society. And the idea was that if you destroy the family, you destroy the West, because the family is the foundation of the strength of the West. And you notice that in Russia, they do not allow any form of LGBT stuff going on in their country, because they were the ones that encouraged all of that themselves. They're well aware, so this is stuff that, it might seem far-fetched that the Ottomans, well, actually I don't think it's that far-fetched at all, but the Ottomans had an interest in dividing Europe. And that's what happens between empires down through the centuries. Empires use every stratagem that they can think of to weaken their enemy and strengthen themselves. And divide and conquer is one of the best strategies, in doing all of that.
Yeah.
But, critical theory. Critical theory. Thank you. There, that's the one. Yeah, that's
just really Marxism. And what's interesting is that Dr. James Lindsay recently had a discussion on Marx. He had a brilliant talk called "The Dialectical Faith of Leftism." He actually states Marx was a Satanist, which is crazy for him. I mean, he was a hardcore atheist, but now the way James Lindsay is talking, you're like, man, this is such a turn, because he's now openly saying these people were evil. This is the opposer. These people define exactly the definition of the Christian, the biblical Satan. Their behavior. And he says all of these things are targeted at the Christian idea of God. And all of these things share a common sort of set of beliefs. And he says this makes one, he's talking in biblical terms now. And it's crazy how well he knows the Bible now. And he looks at these opposing ideologies and ideas And I'm off of the mind that in 12 months he's going to be a Christian.
Yeah,
So,
that's usually how it happens, when they start putting two together. Another modern parallel in terms of what we're talking about today is Germany funded Lenin's revolution in 1917. He was given tons of money and he used it to set up the propaganda. And it's very much like what the Ottomans did, give money to the Christians to just start the Reformation, or at least support the Reformation that started. But it came back to, of course, to hurt Germany, because, of course, the communists went and started invading and fighting the Germans later. But
true, but I mean, these are the war of. I mean, look, you had international communism, the Comintern, which was the Soviet model, and you had national communism, which was the Nazi model.
Yeah.
Right.
So essentially, the same thing.
Yeah, it was race-based. Yeah, it was race-based communism versus class-based communism. That was really it.
Yeah. Never thought of it that way. Yeah, it's true.
And I mean, so yeah, just I don't want to get too much into conspiracy theory territory, but also if you look at the world's largest secret society, it's the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
And they claim up to 100 million adherents and millions of members, a couple of million or more members, and 100 million adherents. I mean, if you look at it, the nation of Israel is what, 8 million people? And these people have 100 million members or adherents. So the largest secret society, and it's a Sufi organization, and they claim to obviously be to know the secrets of occult magic.
Yeah.
So I mean, and all of this can be tied to Islam, and they claim to have founded the Freemasons. They claim to be the original founders of the Freemasons, the Rosicrucian Order. I mean, these are genuine historical phenomena, right? Genuine historical organizations that still exist. I mean, but if you trace the history, it's hysterical how they've made stuff up and changed the history, and it's just a big joke. But that's it. They're real. They might be crazy, but they still.
It's interesting that according to the early sources I could pinpoint, is not Islam, but the Arab Rising occurred in 617. I mentioned this to you earlier. In 1717 is when the Freemasons had their first Grand Lodge in London. So that's another 17. The Russian Revolution happened in 1917. There seems to be a lot of things happening in 17. It seems to be the year of revolution. And if these are linked, as you suggest, it makes sense why that would be the case.
Also, if you look at the Rosicrucians on that, the Rosicrucians claim that their guy went to Arabia, Morocco or Sudan or whatever, and he met with the Sufis, and the Sufis taught him the secret wisdom, and he brought back Muslim Sufi knowledge, and he formed the Rosicrucian Order. So the Rosicrucian Order claims to have a Muslim origin. The Sufis claim that they founded the Freemasons, and if you look at the Shriners, they are outright Muslim organization, which is, and to be a Shriner, you must first be a Freemason, and then you can become a Shriner, and they are outright Islamic. So all of these secret organizations seem to have at root something to do with Islam. And I'm pretty sure if you start to look at socialism, you start to look at what happened in the not the Reformation. We know that there's a link to the Reformation in Islam, but you go into the Enlightenment, I'm pretty sure I will start finding Islamic links.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Lloyd. We've covered a lot of ground today, and thank you so much for interesting discussion. Thanks a lot, everyone who has been commenting throughout the video. I'm sorry I haven't been able to read too many comments. I'm not 100% today. I'm working on sort of 20% with my cold, but hopefully I'll be back to better form in the next couple of days. So thank you all. Make sure to like this video if you liked it, and share it with your friends, and see you all very soon. Thank you very much.